What would you do if the company you built, the company you loved, the company you believed would change the world, fired you? Imagine spending years building your dream, working day and night, sacrificing everything, watching your vision become reality, and then one day being told that you no longer belong. Would you survive that? Would you ever recover? Steve Jobs did, and that's why the world remembers his name. Today, billions of people carry devices inspired by his vision. His company became one of the most valuable businesses in human history. But the story of Steve Jobs is not really about success. It's about rejection, failure, humiliation, and one man's refusal to quit. Because before Apple became a trillion-dollar company, before the iPhone changed the world, before Steve Jobs became a legend, he was just a young man searching for his place in the world. And perhaps the most incredible part of his story began before he was even born. Steve Jobs entered this world under circumstances that many people would consider heartbreaking. He was born on February 24, 1955. His biological parents were not married. They made the painful decision to give their baby up for adoption. Imagine that for a moment. Before he took his first steps, before he spoke his first words, his life had already been shaped by sacrifice. Steve was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs. They were not wealthy, they were not famous, they were ordinary people. But sometimes ordinary people create extraordinary futures. Paul Jobs worked as a mechanic. He loved building things with his hands. And without realizing it, he would teach his son one of the most important lessons of his life. Quality matters. Details matter. The things nobody sees matter. As a child, Steve was different, very different. He was intelligent, curious, restless, and often difficult. Teachers struggled with him. School bored him. Rules frustrated him. He wasn't interested in fitting in to the world around him. He wanted to understand it. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong? Like everyone else understood the rules except you? Steve Jobs felt that way for much of his life. And sometimes the people who feel they don't belong are the very people who end up changing the world. As Steve grew older, his fascination with technology became an obsession. He spent countless hours taking apart electronics, studying how things worked, trying to understand how ideas became reality. He wasn't simply interested in machines, he was interested in possibility. Then, something happened that changed everything. As a teenager, Steve met someone who would become one of the most important people in his life, Steve Wozniak. At first glance, they couldn't have been more different. Wozniak was quiet, brilliant, an engineering genius. Steve Jobs was ambitious, intense, obsessed with the future. But together, they created something powerful, a partnership, a dream, a vision. They believed that computers should not belong only to giant corporations. They believed ordinary people should have access to technology. Today, that sounds obvious, but in the 1970s, it sounded impossible. And that's when everything changed. In 1976, inside a small family garage, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak founded a company called Apple. Think about that. No billion-dollar investors, no massive office, no guarantees, just two young men, a garage, and a dream. Would you have believed in them? Would you have invested your life savings? Most people wouldn't have. But Steve Jobs had something more powerful than money. He had belief.
And sometimes, belief is the only thing standing between failure and greatness. The early days of Apple were not glamorous. There were long nights, financial struggles, fear, uncertainty. Steve sold personal belongings. They worked endlessly, and every day they faced the terrifying possibility that everything could collapse. But then, something unbelievable happened. People began buying their computers, then more people, then even more. Apple wasn't just surviving, it was growing, and growing fast. For the first time, Steve Jobs could see his impossible dream becoming reality. But success creates a dangerous illusion. You begin to believe that failure can never touch you. And unfortunately, the worst moment of Steve Jobs' life was still ahead. To be continued.
Success can be dangerous, not because it destroys you, but because it convinces you that failure will never happen again. By the early 1980s, Apple was no longer a small company operating out of a garage. It had become one of the fastest-growing companies in America. Steve Jobs was still in his 20s, and already people were calling him a genius. Imagine that. Just a few years earlier, you were building computers in a garage. Now the entire world is watching you. How would you handle that pressure? Would you stay humble? Would you stay focused? Or would you begin to believe your own legend? Steve Jobs wasn't interested in becoming successful. He wanted to create something revolutionary. He wanted to build products that people didn't even know they needed. He believed technology should not only work, it should inspire, it should feel magical. And for a while, everything seemed to be working. Then came the Macintosh. Steve believed the Macintosh would change the world. He poured his heart into it. He demanded perfection. He pushed his team harder than anyone thought possible. Some people admired him, others feared him, because Steve Jobs had a gift. He could make people believe they were capable of doing the impossible. But that same gift came with a price. He was demanding, intense, sometimes impossible to work with. Imagine working 18 hours a day, sacrificing your family, sacrificing your health, only to hear someone tell you this isn't good enough, again and again and again. That was what many people experienced working with Steve Jobs. But Steve believed greatness required sacrifice, and for a moment he appeared to be right. In January 1984, Apple introduced the Macintosh. The launch became one of the most famous moments in business history. The audience cheered. The media celebrated. Steve Jobs stood on stage believing he had changed the future forever. But then, something happened that nobody expected. Sales slowed down. Problems appeared. Internal conflicts grew. And inside Apple, a battle had already begun. A battle for control. A battle for power. A battle that Steve Jobs never imagined he could lose. Have you ever built something with your own hands? Something you loved? Something that felt like a part of who you were? Now imagine someone taking it away. That nightmare was becoming reality. The Apple board of directors began losing confidence in Steve. Executives questioned his leadership. Relationships collapsed. Meetings became arguments. Arguments became war. And Steve Jobs found himself fighting against the very company he created. Think about that. The company he started in his parents' garage. The company he sacrificed everything for. The company he believed was his life's purpose was turning against him.
And then, in 1985, the impossible happened. Steve Jobs lost. He was forced out of Apple at only 30 years old. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that you no longer belong in the company you built. Imagine reading newspaper headlines about your failure. Imagine millions of people watching your humiliation. What would you do? Would you quit? Would you disappear? Would you spend the rest of your life regretting what happened? Steve Jobs later described it as one of the worst experiences of his life. He felt rejected, embarrassed, lost. For a brief moment, he had no idea what to do next. The dream was over. The company was gone. The future was uncertain. And for a brief moment, Steve Jobs thought everything he had worked for had been destroyed. But sometimes, the greatest opportunities hide inside our greatest failures. And what Steve Jobs did next would shock the world.
Imagine losing everything you spent your entire life building. Imagine watching your dream collapse. Imagine seeing your name in the headlines, not as a hero, but as a failure. That was Steve Jobs in 1985. He was 30 years old. He had built Apple, and then Apple fired him. For months, Steve felt lost. He later admitted that he was devastated, embarrassed, ashamed. He had spent years believing he was changing the world. Now, he wasn't even sure who he was anymore. Let me ask you something. What happens when the one thing that defines your identity disappears? Who are you then? Most people never have to answer that question. Steve Jobs did, and for a while, he had no answer. He considered leaving Silicon Valley. He considered walking away from technology forever. He thought his story was over. But sometimes life destroys your plans because it wants to build something greater. And that's exactly what happened to Steve Jobs. Slowly, something unexpected happened. He began to feel free. For the first time in years, he no longer had a company to protect, no board members to fight, no shareholders to satisfy. He had nothing left to lose. And sometimes, having nothing left to lose is the most powerful position in the world. So Steve Jobs did something extraordinary. He started over, again, at the age of 30. Think about that. Most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid starting over. Steve Jobs embraced it. In 1985, he founded a new company. Its name was Next. The goal wasn't to make money. The goal wasn't to prove people wrong. The goal was to build something beautiful, something revolutionary, something worthy of his vision. But there was a problem. Next was expensive, complicated, and difficult to sell. Once again, Steve faced criticism. Once again, people questioned him. Once again, many believed he was failing. But Steve Jobs had learned something important. Failure doesn't mean you're moving backward. Sometimes, failure means you're building something the world simply isn't ready for yet. And while Next struggled, something else happened. Something that would change not only Steve's life, but the future of entertainment itself. One day, Steve Jobs purchased a small computer graphics company. Most people had never heard of it. Few believed it had any future. But Steve saw something others didn't: potential. That company was called Pixar. Imagine buying a company that loses money year after year. Imagine investing millions while everyone around you thinks you've made another mistake. Would you continue? Steve did, because visionaries often see tomorrow long before everyone else.
Years passed, money disappeared, critics laughed, and yet Steve refused to quit. Then something unbelievable happened. In 1995, Pixar released its first feature film, a movie called Toy Story. Nobody expected what happened next. The film became a global phenomenon. Audiences loved it, critics praised it, and suddenly Steve Jobs was no longer the man who failed at Apple. He was the man who had revolutionized animation again. But the most incredible part of his story was still waiting, because while Steve Jobs was rebuilding his life, the company that had fired him was falling apart, and soon Apple would come back to the one person they had pushed away, the man they never should have lost. To be continued.
Imagine this: the company that fired you, the company that humiliated you, the company that broke your heart, calls you back and asks for your help. Would you answer? Would you forgive them? Would you return? Because that's exactly what happened to Steve Jobs. By the mid-1990s, Apple was in serious trouble. Sales were falling, innovation had slowed. The company that once changed the world was now fighting to survive. Many experts believed Apple was finished. Some predicted bankruptcy. Others believed the company would disappear forever. And that's when something happened that nobody expected. Apple purchased Next, the company Steve Jobs had started after being fired. Think about that for a moment. The company that rejected him was now buying the company he built after they rejected him. Life has a strange sense of humor. At first, Steve returned only as an advisor, but everyone could see the truth. Apple didn't just need advice. Apple needed Steve Jobs. In 1997, Steve Jobs returned to Apple. The man who had been fired from his own company walked back through the same doors. But this time, he was different. Failure had changed him. Pain had changed him. Experience had changed him. He was no longer the young man who believed passion alone could change the world. He had learned that greatness requires discipline, sacrifice, and the courage to make difficult decisions. The situation was worse than almost anyone realized. Apple was losing money, products were failing, employees were afraid, investors were losing hope. Imagine walking into a company that everyone believes is dying. Would you know what to do? Steve did. He made a decision that shocked everyone. He started saying no. No to projects, no to ideas, no to products. He eliminated almost everything because Steve believed something powerful. Focus is not about saying yes, it's about having the courage to say no. And then he made another decision, one that many people considered impossible. He partnered with Microsoft. Yes, Microsoft, Apple's biggest rival. When Steve Jobs appeared on stage announcing the partnership, some Apple fans were furious, but Steve didn't care. He wasn't trying to win popularity. He was trying to save Apple. And slowly, something began to change. The company became stronger, the products became better, the vision became clearer. Then, in 1998, Apple introduced a product that nobody saw coming: the iMac. It wasn't just a computer, it was a statement, a declaration that Apple was alive. And the world responded. Sales exploded. Apple survived. But Steve Jobs wasn't finished, not even close. Because he wasn't trying to save a company,
He was trying to reinvent the future. And what happened next would change not just Apple, but music, phones, movies, technology, and the lives of billions of people around the world. To be continued.
Imagine this. The company that fired you, the company that humiliated you, the company that broke your heart, calls you back and asks for your help. Would you answer? Would you forgive them? Would you return? Because that's exactly what happened to Steve Jobs. By the mid-1990s, Apple was in serious trouble. Sales were falling. Innovation had slowed. The company that once changed the world was now fighting to survive. Many experts believed Apple was finished. Some predicted bankruptcy. Others believed the company would disappear forever. And that's when something happened that nobody expected. Apple purchased Next, the company Steve Jobs had started after being fired. Think about that for a moment. The company that rejected him was now buying the company he built after they rejected him. Life has a strange sense of humor. At first, Steve returned only as an advisor, but everyone could see the truth. Apple didn't just need advice. Apple needed Steve Jobs. In 1997, Steve Jobs returned to Apple. The man who had been fired from his own company walked back through the same doors. But this time, he was different. Failure had changed him. Pain had changed him. Experience had changed him. He was no longer the young man who believed passion alone could change the world. He had learned that greatness requires discipline, sacrifice, and the courage to make difficult decisions. The situation was worse than almost anyone realized. Apple was losing money. Products were failing. Employees were afraid. Investors were losing hope. Imagine walking into a company that everyone believes is dying. Would you know what to do? Steve did. He made a decision that shocked everyone. He started saying no. No to projects. No to ideas. No to products. He eliminated almost everything. Because Steve believed something powerful. Focus is not about saying yes. It's about having the courage to say no. And then he made another decision, one that many people considered impossible. He partnered with Microsoft. Yes, Microsoft, Apple's biggest rival. When Steve Jobs appeared on stage announcing the partnership, some Apple fans were furious, but Steve didn't care. He wasn't trying to win popularity. He was trying to save Apple. And slowly, something began to change. The company became stronger. The products became better. The vision became clearer. Then, in 1998, Apple introduced a product that nobody saw coming, the iMac. It wasn't just a computer. It was a statement, a declaration that Apple was alive. And the world responded. Sales exploded. Apple survived. But Steve Jobs wasn't finished, not even close, because he wasn't trying to save a company. He was trying to reinvent the future. And what happened next would change not just Apple, but music, phones, movies, technology, and the lives of billions of people around the world. To be continued.
Imagine achieving everything you ever dreamed of. Building one of the greatest companies in history. Changing the lives of billions of people. Becoming one of the most admired people on earth. And then, being told that you might not have much time left to live. How would you react? Would money matter? Would fame matter? Would success matter? Because in 2003, Steve Jobs faced a challenge unlike anything he had ever experienced. He was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. For a moment, everything stopped. The man who had spent his entire life fighting impossible battles was now facing an enemy he could not negotiate with. He could not outwork it. He could not outsmart it. He could not reinvent it. Imagine sitting alone, knowing that your future has suddenly become uncertain, knowing that all your plans, dreams, and ambitions might disappear. What would you think about? Steve Jobs thought about life. He thought about time. He thought about what truly mattered. And perhaps that is why he later gave one of the most powerful speeches ever delivered. In 2005, Steve Jobs stood in front of graduating students at Stanford University. He wasn't speaking as a billionaire. He wasn't speaking as the CEO of Apple. He was speaking as a human being who understood that life is fragile. He told them something the world would never forget. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Think about those words. How many people spend their entire lives trying to become what others expect them to become? How many dreams die because of fear? Steve Jobs understood something that most people never realize. The fear of failure is nothing compared to the regret of never trying. And despite his illness, despite the pain, despite the uncertainty, he continued working. Because Steve Jobs wasn't building products, he was building a legacy. Under his leadership, Apple continued to create revolutionary products. The iPhone changed communication. The iPad changed computing. Apple became one of the most valuable companies in the world. And millions of people looked at Steve Jobs and saw success. But they didn't always see the sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the fear, the pressure, the pain. Because every great success story has a price, and sometimes that price is invisible. As the years passed, Steve's health continued to decline. Yet he refused to stop believing. He refused to stop creating. He refused to stop dreaming. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside his story. Great people don't become great because life is easy. They become great because they continue moving forward when life becomes difficult. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away. He was only 56 years old. The world stopped. Millions mourned. Not because a billionaire had died, not because a CEO had died, but because a visionary had left us. A man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could become. Let me ask you one final question. What if Steve Jobs had given up after being fired from Apple? What if he had accepted failure? What if he had stopped believing in himself? There would be no comeback story, no iPhone, no Apple Renaissance, no legacy. And perhaps that's why his story matters so much. Because Steve Jobs proved something extraordinary. Failure is not the opposite of success. Sometimes, failure is the road that leads to it. Maybe the world doesn't believe in your dream. Maybe you failed. Maybe you've been rejected. Maybe you're starting over. But remember this: the man who changed the world was once fired from his own company. Every billionaire, every empire, every legend started from zero. And perhaps your story is only just beginning.